So getting back to how Mouse ruined comics.
Okay.
All right, 30 seconds. Your 30 seconds are up. No more boomer music.
Stop right there, criminal scum.
I can't get over how much fun that is. Guys, it's Wednesday. It's another episode of the Mattriarchy. We are talking about patriotism in comics. And, of course, because I'm an American, that's the patriotism that I care about. So if you're listening from Canada, it's not that I don't respect you. It's just that you're not as special as me. That's mostly a joke. Twitless is with me today. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thanks for alienating half our audience.
Well, I'm sure. There's 15 people. Okay. We've got a small audience. That's
okay.
Fine. We also were joined by Captain Frugal coming back again. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. And in that intro, I heard boomer music, and then they were playing the Scorpions. I was just playing that song this morning. So,
well, you can thank Evie, Pocket Evie, for putting that together for us. She's been a longtime fan and done some drawings. Our little headshots that are in our little thumbnails are her doing. For the first time ever, the Ideal Comics co-owner Barry Tetz is with me as well on this show. He's never been able to be here before, but his days off aligned, and I thought, hey, come on, let's talk about patriotism. How's it going, Barry?
Hey guys, hello.
We've also got probably, I don't know, I want to say an expert in patriotism based on the number of comics he's put together on the subject. Tim Lim with the Common America. How's it going, Tim? Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me on. I'm doing very well. I hope everyone else here is doing fine too.
Yeah, I am, and of course Captain Cummings.
Yo,
who is can't say a resident, but a guest historian. Who I thought would be the perfect person to come on and talk about these kind of topics, and a member of the United States Services. So thank you for your service, and to the stream as well as to the country.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. So did we all read the Fighting American #1?
Did you do your homework, children?
I read it a long time ago. I'll admit that. So I probably forgot more than I remember.
Time to do your book reports.
So,
ironically, I have the Marvel Comics printing of Fighting America, the Simon and Kirby Classic.
I wasn't aware that Marvel did a printing of that.
Yeah, Simon was very smart, and he mostly copied. He trademarked most of his characters, and he allowed Marvel in the '90s to do a printing of it, and it's probably the only time it's been reprinted.
That's crazy. So, I read the comic. I did not do a lot of research into it, but Fighting American, it feels like something that was produced after Captain America.
Yeah.
So, am I correct in understanding? I meant to look up the print company that was published under. Was that after they had left the fold and was kind of doing their own when Simon and Kirby kind of invented the romance comic and they were doing comics on their own? That was all in that.
Give a quick 1-minute history.
Yeah, man, do it. Yeah.
So basically, Marvel was doing the Hollywood what is it called? Money thing, where Captain America was making the most money, accounting. And it was basically paying for the entire Marvel line. So they were breaking even because they had a certain deal where if it made so much money, Kirby and Simon would make more money. They found out about that and they decided, well, F it. We're going to go work for other companies on the side as well. They got fired, allegedly because Stanley snitched. I'm
sorry.
And then essentially they got pissed and went and did Fighting America. It was basically their other Captain America ideas.
And the Captain, the Fighting American story. Now, I've read some of the relaunches. I'd read some stuff about the character, but for some reason, it didn't catch me, like the origin of the story until I read the comic here, and there were a couple things about it that was crazy. But one thing is you're dealing with the two brothers, right? So you've got I don't know, did Twitless, I know we're jumping kind of into this quick, but did you happen to bring up any pictures to share?
I do have images. If you give me a second, I can share some of them. Let's see, where do you want to go?
Well, just the beginning of the comic there,
Okay,
toward
perfect.
the beginning of it, because
Yeah.
it's got the two brothers. One is a veteran and one is a reporter, and you've got the beefy brother and the wormy brother, which I thought was.
Let me tell you, brother.
Something like that. And so the Flag, is their last name Flag? Remember that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so the beefy brother had been a war veteran and had gotten injured in wartime, and he takes the job as like the voice of America, right? He's this where everybody respects and knows the guy, and he's got this radio presence, and he's warning about that there are feverish forces that are trying to invade and destabilize America, and don't trust them and don't give them money. He starts naming some names of these people that are involved, that are these sleeper agents of this foreign government that is strangely not named.
Oh yeah, it's the unfriendly foreign power is what they call it.
First of all, guys, did anybody else find that the weirdest thing in the story was that they didn't bother naming? There was all of these hints about who these people were, but they were never named.
They might have done that to be like, I'm guessing at the time that came out in the 1950s, they weren't exactly precious about basically calling people out. So I bet, this is just speculation. I'm guessing it was just foresight that, just as in, like, for example, G.I. Joe, you have Cobra. It's kind of an unnamed, unallianced terrorist organization affiliated with some just kind of amorphous Eastern European state or bloc. I think they probably just did it as honestly, I think from a storytelling perspective, it is more prudent to kind of have the villains be not affiliated with any known dissident, because it gives a sense of timelessness. That was actually something that I chalked up to its favor after reading those episodes last night.
It doesn't.
I would agree. It definitely didn't make it feel as dated, right? But it was, part of it felt weird to me because, thinking back to Captain America and the stuff that they were doing in 41, right? The same team was doing a similar concept in 41. Like, gloves were totally off, right? They were calling out Germany specifically. They were calling out the Nazis. They were talking about the Bund and all those war era propaganda pieces. In this one, it's all very like sideways.
Well, part of that's probably because the Cold War was a Cold War. It was a undeclared kind of thing, and so I would also imagine once the gloves are off, in terms of like we're in a hot war, then it just there's no point in dressing things up.
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine that even if you're not against the idea of a war, you're probably not trying to inflame. You know what I mean? So maybe if they were calling out Russia specifically, it could be interpreted as, "Hey, you're inflaming things more than they should," because the Cold War was people were scared. People didn't want there to be another war. There'd been so many already, and the Cold War promised to be the war to end all wars and kill everybody. So I would imagine there may have been some potential. An urge to not inflame things past what they already were. Whereas in World War II, we were already at war, so it doesn't make sense not to call out the enemy.
And you got to keep in mind that we might have been at war with Korea during this time too.
Ooh.
Right.
That's something I didn't even think to look at. That's very possible.
You guys are having all this deep, thoughtful discussion, and I'm just thinking, wow, look at the resolution on that TV.
So this scene is really interesting because it's like the television. The television is informing these people about the scammer, but it's almost like, and this is very clever of the creative team. And it's always interesting to point these types of creative things out. So it's like the TV is actually. He's like, it's almost as if he's a character inside the room with them. He's like, don't give this swindler a cent. He's clearly not in the room with them, but they frame the shot as if he is. And so he might as well have been a character inside the room with them. And then they turn on the bad guy. And it's a really clever framing device that they do there. And I always like to point those things out because some of these comics, because they are much older, we can sometimes gloss over some of the really clever things that they do. But Simon and Kirby were a powerhouse, and they were able to do some very clever things with comics that still hold up today very strongly.
Well, I like that you mentioned that with, for example, with Kirby, because the backgrounds, the environment itself is a character in a lot of his books. They really do jump out. They're a vital key aspect of the comic, whereas sometimes in some of the issues, the background could have been swapped with almost anything and it wouldn't have made a difference. But with these books, it really had an impact on the story and added to it.
Indeed. So
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, you going to say, Barry?
I was going to add more to that. Like the TV, for example, he's definitely a character in that frame. It's they take less, time, and you can see some other things where they hurried through the scenes just to make him work. But as the other pointing out, yeah, he's definitely a character right there within that frame.
Yeah. Well, and one I think is really interesting. Back to the main plot of the story. So Simon and I'm not Simon. Yeah, Simon and Kirby. Earlier they were talking about Siegel and Schuster, and I had almost said Simon and Schuster, but that's a publishing house. That's totally different.
I get those confused all the time too. Yeah.
I don't normally, but I did there. Thanks, Taylor. But no, with Simon and Kirby having left Marvel, striking out on their own, doing their own thing. This was 54. I was looking up when this one came out. So I think we were still involved in Korea. Their stuff was still burbling about all that kind of intrigues around the Cold War and all that sort of thing. And the Red Scare was still going on at that point, which is that's
very much a theme in this particular book. You can, as you can see on these panels, the whole secret agents among us who are trying to undermine the country. You can see that in the top right hand corner there. The money these rats collect will be used for guns and bullets to be used against us. Fellow Americans, beware of the vermin in our midst. If you see him, call a cop confidentially. He can't even sing.
Sorry, your accent threw me off there.
I figured it fit the old timey.
Yeah, it does. It does. So the story goes on from here. Was we have the big burly flag boy who is injured in World War II, but comes back and becomes the voice of America. This crusading journalist.
He's basically Alex Jones. I love it. This is superhero Alex Jones, and I absolutely love every second of it.
Right, but he's not a superhero yet. That's the ticket. So he's in the beginning of the story. He's infirmed. He can't fight. His frame is hampered by the strength of his frame is hampered by the fragility of it. Right. So, his younger brother, the wormy brother, is the guy who's the brains behind the whole ordeal.
Randall.
Yeah, Randall. And so then one day, is it Johnny and Randall?
I believe it's Johnny and Randall.
Johnny and Nelson.
Oh, Nelson. Oh, you're right. Yeah. Where did I get Randall from?
I don't know, because I was thinking that name. I mean, I thought Nelson was kind of a weak name, but I was like, wait, Randall? That sounds a little bit more masculine than what I had in mind.
Oh, I see.
Oh, now you've pissed off every Nelson out there. We're in trouble now.
Well, I got Johnny right. I got the Johnny part right.
So Johnny, he's a crusading journalist, and then one day the not commies shoot him dead, right? And so what do they do? They're getting ready to so his brother Nelson and the girl reporter that is sweet on both the brothers. They go to the funeral, and Nelson is snatched away by by shadowy agents of our own government. And Twitless, what do they have to say?
Wait, which scene do we want to start with?
Well, I mean,
this
just
is the death scene.
Yeah.
Johnny dies, and he pulls. Yeah. That's what ends up happening. It's great. We'll get to that in a bit. But yeah, Johnny dies, and of his wounds of being attacked by basically, commie agents. And immediately the government just shows up, and they say, "Hey, I want to take his place." And, yeah. So they propose this crazy experiment, and as opposed to just giving him superpowers himself, and this is and I'd love to talk about with the panel about this, because I think there's some, there's obviously just the sci-fi angle to it, but I think there may be some patriotic metaphor going on behind what this particular origin story is, because the setup is this. You see, Nelson, we found ourselves in an age of incredible scientific development. The death rate of secret agents in this new high-voltage world has increased alarmingly. Do I have to do them both? Or can someone else voice the wimp?
I can voice the wimp.
I'm not doing a follow-up for that.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead. It's Frugal if you want to. Go ahead, man.
That's quite disturbing, sir. May I ask what you're leading up to?
I'm glad you asked. The fact that we can now produce the type of man we need, the agent of the future, a highly geared, almost indestructible power, whom we call Project Fighting American. The figure... Oh, sorry, I tripped on your line.
That figure looks like my brother, the way he used to before he was wounded.
It is your brother's body, revitalized and strengthened, ready for a new occupant. Don't be frightened. It's purely science, not black magic. We want you to wear that body. We want you to be your brother. It will mean the end of you as you are now.
It sounds a bit frightening, sir. And I'm not ashamed to admit that I'm scared stiff. Whoa, he's stiff, guys. But I've declared my life to carry on my brother's fight. I'm going to see it through, no matter what the cost. I'm your man, Colonel. I'm ready for this experiment. And I heard these pills will keep it good and stiff for a long time, too.
Okay. Oh, goodness. And we killed Rhys.
Fighting Viagra.
Oh, man.
So what's interesting about this origin story is the fact that it involves the weaker brother, Nelson, literally kind of like sacrificing his life to basically put himself inside the corpse of his brother's body that has been basically revitalized. And so he's no longer Nelson. He still has the mind, I guess, that he kind of had. But I would even say that kind of changes, because once he kind of goes inside his brother's body, he really becomes someone entirely different. Mm-hmm. He becomes this super patriotic character who's brave and strong, and he takes over his brother's role and becomes super Alex Jones 2.0 to fight all of the commies who'd plague America. And so what I would love to pose to the panel is, what do you guys make of this idea, this particular vision of patriotism, where you have to die to yourself and become something else? Because I think that's a very interesting angle on this type of patriotic superhero.
I think that might be reading into it too much. I think the writers just had frankly, I think they just had a really weird idea. I was just laughing the whole time I was reading that origin story, because I just thought, man, there's a lot of different ways they could have done that. They could have had it where it was like Face Off, where they basically just, just redid his face to cosmetically look like his brother. They already had the technology to make him a super soldier, so it's like, why not do that? Oh wait, yeah, we might get sued, because essentially that's the same plot as the people that we're openly borrowing ideas from. So I don't know. You might have a point. I just don't see the DNA in it.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess I should say that it's more of, I think, of an interpretive thing. I wouldn't say that it's like they meant to say this exactly. I guess what I would say is that because of what they've done, I think you can do a reading into it that's different, that has a kind of another layer to
yes,
it.
I agree that it's ripe for that type of interpretation or reinterpretation, as in like that's definitely an angle you'd want to choose if you were tasked with bringing it to the modern era, for example.
In the foreword, Joe Simon basically said that they were annoyed with the McCarthy hearings, and essentially they wanted to make fun of like the war on communism because they felt like McCarthy went too far.
So there's a slight satirical. I guess I could kind of maybe pick a little bit of that. There's like a slight satirical side to it with the almost hyperbolic nature of the character.
And at the same time, like the threats that McCarthy was talking about are true in this story in every way. I mean, it's not like it's a full like parody of it. So that's an interesting.
It's not a full parody, but it is good. Thank you, thank you all for your thoughts there, and Captain Cummings, your thoughts there. I think about the slight satirical side definitely come out. I think in this first exchange here.
That one where he's upside down. It's so weird.
Where the bad guy literally says, "I'm gonna call him up on the phone, and we're just gonna have a fight." And he's like, "Thank you for calling. I was hunting you down, by the way." And he's like, "Sure, let's meet up."
He picks up the phone. "This is a collect call. Will you accept the charges?"
From "I hate you"
or communist fifth column. Oh,
yeah,
sure.
exactly. Yeah. I love this panel right here. "Oh yes, Peter, glad you called. I was just going out to find you." Is just yeah. Just perfect. And I would also say that the way this book tends to read in all three of its stories, there is like a commie behind every rock. It's so that angle definitely comes through in a way that it doesn't come through even in traditional Captain America comics. Like they're every freaking where. So. Calling you on the phone at dinner.
I'd like to take this moment to point out, though, that they were. that's the most frustrating thing about McCarthy is that McCarthy like had his list that he never showed anyone, but like all of the Senate hearings to find the commies in Hollywood were 10 years before that. Everybody knew. They had roll calls at the communist day camps. It wasn't a secret.
I wanted to make a couple of shout outs to chat. We got, like I said, Evie's in our chat saying this new Avatar sequel is pretty messed up.
That's pretty awesome.
Surprise.
Ichthus says, "What is up, total excellence?" And Murica, fighting Murican. And Dave says,
Thank you, Florida man.
Yeah. Dave says this is nuts. I love it. So thank you, chat, for participating.
Evie's got the best thing. "Let's meet up, fight, and get lunch later."
Yeah.
Did anybody else notice too that in the bottom right panel, the hero later on gets you see it there, he's down upside down in the window. Spider-Man steals this gimmick later on too. I might add.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Obviously, it means that Joe Simon created Spider-Man.
Ah, there you go.
or it means that Ditko loved this comic.
Ditko might have loved this comic. I'm thinking about that.
I wouldn't put it past. Yeah.
You've got your headline now. Ditko might have loved this comic.
Yeah.
That Ditko definitely hated communists, so there's that. But
And the thing is, Ditko would have read this without any sense of satire or irony. He would have just said, "Oh, that's exactly the way it is." I'm right. Okay.
Yeah. I found myself fighting that urge.
Okay. All right.
The only thing, like in the second story, the one story bit to slightly spoil it for people that are out there, when it's revealed that everybody's a communist in the second story, except for the dead guy, Fighting American, and Speed Boy. And then every other character with a spoken line in the comic was a commie.
Yep.
I was like, Well, that's a little bit much.
Now, man, you didn't even preface that with spoilers for like a 70-year-old comic book.
Well, I did a little bit. A little bit.
To be fair, there were a lot of commies. There still are a lot of commies.
There are a lot of commies.
You're a commie. You're a commie. They're all a commie.
They're pretty much. Well, and the worst of it is that a lot of people don't even know they're commies. That's how insidious it's been. But
yeah, next thing you know, that you're like just talking to somebody. Next thing you know, they want free health care.
Yeah.
How close is
It's like the plot of Babylon. It's like the plot of Babylon 5. You're all Cylons.
Yeah.
So
Wait,
Douglas
Cylons aren't in Babylon 5.
Or sorry, gosh, I'm getting everything wrong today.
That's
Battlestar Galactica. Battlestar Galactica.
Yeah. Come on, man.
I just got. I'm. My brain is just mush today. I got out of a 3-hour class, so like all my thoughts are just soup. Douglas Ernst says, "Witnessed by Whittaker Chambers is a must-read for all Americans. The U.S. government was compromised at the highest levels."
This is true.
And Ichthus says, "I honestly like Fighting American more than Captain America. 1, the name, and 2, the costume design." The name's good. I'm not entirely sold on the costume. I think it's a little busy. One of my critiques of Kirby is that he could be a bit busy at times. Sometimes he overloads a panel so that my eyes just kind of hurt to look at it. He does beautiful work, but it's just a minor thing that maybe it's just taste.
It's definitely a step down from Captain America.
Yeah. And not to be biased, but I like my costume better.
Taylor says at times they can be too busy. Yes, Taylor, just at times. Not everything needs to be an anthropomorphic cartoon animal comic.
Oh, that's.
I know. Gauntlet thrown next time.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
He's gonna have stuff to say to me, and that's fine.
All right, let's jump into more of this book though, because there's some other wonderful scenes. Yeah. First off, I would say again, because this is a Jack Kirby work, you get some impressive action. So I do have to show off the fight scene that happens after they make their play date over the phone.
So the thing I think is interesting about the personalities that I want to get into before we talk about the fight scene is that it's almost like Nelson is projecting his image of his brother, right? So he has this idea that his brother is this super patriotic, he was able to go and serve his country. He has these ideas that are, sorry, Evie's cracking me up in the chat. And not wrong. But the idea, so he's projecting this idea of who Johnny is. And I think that's really an interesting in comics, because that's my theory about the difference between Peter Parker and Spider-Man, especially in the early issues, is that Peter projects the idea of what he thinks the grown Peter will be like. And that's that difference. So I think it's interesting to see that prefaced here.
Is he projecting it though? Because like as I was kind of mentioning earlier, when he becomes his brother, it almost feels like he kind of just becomes his brother.
But I think he's a more extreme version of his brother. That's part of my thing.
Right, but he's the healthy version of his brother, though. So that could be, I don't know.
Maybe he's doing that too to try to, measure up too. Because you ever notice you try to measure up to something, sometimes you can overcompensate for that.
Cummings, you've read more of this recently. Are there any scenes where he's like trying to put on a facade of his brother, or is he just always like this?
I think he's always like this.
So that's what I thought was interesting, because once he does the transformation, he really doesn't really seem to be. He really seems like Nelson dies in a lot of ways, and he just becomes this. Even if it's a third identity, it's still like he's no longer. He doesn't seem to have like, oh, I have these Nelson thoughts I used to have. He's just entirely 100% pure octane fighting American.
Yeah. Well, when you're in the moment, you gotta fight commies.
Yeah,
that's true. There's no room for it.
I fought like 3 commies today. I mean,
what book are we reading again? And we need to raise taxes.
But get a load of how much, even though this is a classic
this is like
comic,
the best page right here. Like, what is that top left panel? He's like flipping around.
Yeah, but this has the classic earmarks of Kirby action. You know,
And then do the bottom one, the bottom panel, bottom left.
oh yeah, that's an awesome panel. So
One thing I want to know is how is he in that position above the window, and then look at how he crashes through the window.
So it's
How does
weird
that
because
happen?
so his head, his face is like it's facing like above towards the sky, and he goes in at the reverse angle. So he goes in at the angle that you don't assume.
He
anyone
probably
would go
switched
through.
his arms in between the panels.
Yeah, it's weird.
yeah, it is a bit odd.
There's a whole gymnastics routine that didn't get drawn in that gutter.
Yeah, the
That's
pivot.
Scott McCloud's sacred gutter. There's just a whole.
Yeah, because that's his knee, so he's definitely.
I do like that scene though. He punches the dude through a wall, and you just get to see the body like hanging there. That was awesome.
That's a great piece of continuity, that's for sure.
This is a very and you know what? Again, I'm starting to see Cummings what you're talking about with the sort of hyperbole the angle there, because like this is an over the top action scene for the time period, and it's
you got to remember that Simon went on to go work with Mad Magazine after he left Kirby.
But even setting aside the fact that this is supposed to be over the top, this is still a fun page. And it's a fun scene, and you can just, you know, it's brutal, but it's still bloodlessly brutal. So it's I would say a kind of a guilty pleasure that you don't have to feel that guilty about. This isn't the okay.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I'll let you finish.
Oh, I'm reading too much into it, but that's my job. So someone else.
Okay. Well, what I like about a page like this, and you can get that in some comic books. Sometimes you read it and you can almost picture. I mean, to me, when I read a comic book, I envision the voices of the people and how they sound in my head. And sometimes on some pages, I think of music going in, you know, going to it and how it's cinematic. And when I look at this page, I can't help but be thinking, America, yeah, you know, you know, I'm not gonna drop the F-bomb there, but you know, he's busting through, and you hear that America. Just could you imagine that soundtrack playing as he's whooping these guys' rear?
Yeah, definitely cinematic. It's definitely cinematic. So we have an over the top. I don't know if you guys want to look at the second story on here, but we've got this over the top hero with this crazy origin. And one of the other things that's wild about it is it's supposed to be a science fiction origin, but it feels like a ghost story origin, right? Am I the only one that felt that reading the thing, like that there was this bizarre like line that separated it from being like fully science fiction, even though it had all of the trappings of a science fiction story? That it felt almost like a ghost story, dressed up as a science fiction story with the way the origin lays out here.
Well, Dave brings up a good point in chat. He said a lot of little brothers read comics back then. So this is a little brother story, which I think is an interesting thought.
And Kirby's stories always seemed a little more like on the spiritual side than like science fiction.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. The whole
New Gods,
third world. Yeah.
All right. So I also have to, one of the good things about being able to read some of these books in floppy form as opposed to reading them in trade is the fact that you get to experience the advertisements as well. And this is just a snapshot of Americana at the time. So pretty much the polar opposite of what you tend to see in today's fitness ads. Gain more weight in 10 days or your money back.
Well, in today's it would say gain 10 pounds of muscle.
Right.
Yeah.
I might have to have you as a guest on some of my comic book ads videos.
Oh, yeah.
Read it with that classic voice there. I love it.
Skinny men are often ashamed to strip for sports or for a swim. Girls are not alluring and don't have eye-catching curves. Children who won't eat and are underweight, often called skinny. We don't want skinny on our team.
Anyway, but yeah. definitely. I think the ads are a lot of fun, no doubt about that. So,
well, there's another one later on that I have
Okay.
to show, which is pretty amazing. But back to
Also,
our main
Prince,
program.
Did any of you here learn martial arts from the comic books as well? You know, you got to get those orders in there.
No, but I almost saved up for a pair of X-ray specs, and I never got around to it. So,
So in our next adventure, Fighting America tracked down the baby buzz bombs. So literally, he's just at his job. And the other thing that's really interesting about these Fighting American stories is they do not beat around the bush. And this may be part of the hyperbolic, somewhat ironic nature of the stories. But I would say, as someone who enjoys action, the fact that the action starts about 2 panels into the story, and they don't spend a whole lot of time setting the scene. It's literally, hey, Mr. Flag, and then literally you're dodging assassinations within about a page.
So what you're saying is, if Bendis wrote this would be like 12 issues for the first page.
oh yes,
there would definitely be another 200 word balloons, and half of them would be like, oh my gosh, am I right? So Balloon Lord Bendis would fill half of it with just a bunch of sarcastic quip. I have a game that I think I would love to try playing someday, and it's read every other word balloon that Bendis writes and see if you can still track the narrative. Because I think it works. I think you can read every other word balloon and still get the exact same story.
I would like to do that with Powers one of these days. That's his most lauded book, and I think it's garbage. So
read
I think
every
that we
other
should
word
do
balloon.
that. I think we should do that with Powers, like sometime next month, like for the
Okay.
week. Because I think
How
it's
many
trash.
panels are people standing and talking?
Yeah.
Well,
There's so many.
In Fighting American, that's not the case. So
Yes, definitely.
So Tim, we haven't heard from you in a little bit. How about you summarize what's going on in Buzz Bombs?
So this is supposed to be the introduction of Speed Boy, and there's this former, I guess, Nazi created these buzz bombs they're basically just miniaturized missiles to take out the Fighting American. And just so happens that this kid who's like an errand boy for Johnny Flag is like, oh, gee willikers, mister, can I come with you on your adventure? He's like, yeah, sure, why not? And then they go and they find this Nazi who created 2 metal robot men to attack them, and he literally kills the one, I think, by having the female try to cop a feel with him, and she explodes on contact, and the dude just gets blown up to smithereens. You can actually see his foot like being severed in the panel. And Johnny Flag is like,
Yeah, I'll pull
hey
that up.
kid, that was great, you want to be my sidekick? He's like, yeah, let's go on adventures. He's like, no, we got work to do. Let's go back to the studio and film our InfoWars special or whatever.
I'm just glad I've never exploded on a woman's contact.
I wait until
the best thing I've ever heard.
I wait until the third date to do the exploding, like a true gentleman.
Oh my god!
Okay. So I'll tell you something about these. So I fell asleep reading the last one that's in this series, but what I appreciate about these comics is they are definitely not decompressed. They fit a lot of stuff into as few panels as possible, but it's so fast paced you don't even question it, because he's like, this must be the work of this Nazi guy I knew. And here I am thinking, just based on reading modern comics, I was like, okay, here's the exposition. He's going to talk about this Nazi guy he knew. And it's like, no, there he is, Dr. von Fogel. And I'm like, who? It's like, it's superfluous. Like, we don't need to know who he was. You just have to know he was this Nazi dude that he fought, like, during a war, or his brother or whoever.
Right,
and that's it. And it's like, why does he have 2 metallic robots that explode on contact? I don't know. They're just there. So I don't know. I was actually pretty thoroughly amused.
Yeah, and I also thought it was really cool how it kind of it had a lot of the feel of a Captain America story, or like echoed into something that wasn't a Captain America story, but you could definitely tell that it had the same minds at play. So it seemed to fit right in line with the way they were doing that, while it's still being its own thing. So I really appreciated that about it. about this particular mini story. I also thought the tiny buzz bombs was a clever device. The idea of like miniaturized cruise missiles from like 1954, that's pretty cool. I do think it's a little weird that Speed Boy, like they did this huge explanation for how Johnny Flag, comes to be the fighting American, right? The whole thing. And yet he finds this kid who just happens to have super fast reflexes. It's like, sidekicks, they don't need an explanation. He was born that way.
Well, and because the sidekick was kind of an indelible part of a lot of comics back then. I mean, obviously, it kind of makes sense because you're aiming for a younger demographic. They want to tag along with the main hero. And I think that's something that a lot of modern writers forget because they probably don't have children of their own or they don't remember how it was like when you were a kid. You don't grow up wanting to be Robin. You grow up wanting to be Batman, essentially. But you have to have a sidekick character that's kind of an avatar of someone who can follow along with their adventures. It's kind of, they're almost like the everyman character that children can identify with, looking up to the aspirational hero. But I like how in these types of books, I mean, there's not really much dialogue or talk about the harm that can come because it's almost like you just know that everything is going to be okay at the end, despite the high stakes and the drama and stuff. It's like, I want to tag along with you. It's like, no, but I want to. Okay, come with me. That's it. Like that's how that works. It's a little bit of a push. And what I like about it too is that the younger characters in these books, up until I think the 1980s, they didn't fall into that trope of junior knows best. If you have children, you know what I'm talking about because of how annoying this is. I mean, I remember even as a kid, growing up in the 80s, how bad this ended up becoming, where it was this idea of, no, the child is always right and the adult is always wrong. And it happened all the time in cartoons. But
right.
Up until this point, it wasn't so much that the child was right. It was that we know the demographics we're playing into. Let's have them tag along. And it's just an assurance that nothing is going to happen to them. Like, you just know that there doesn't need to be that much pushback from the adults because in the end, like, good is going to triumph over evil. But I like the plucky attitude of a lot of sidekicks from early comics because they don't come across as brats. They come across as fairly likable. They're G kids, you know.
And that puts me in the mind of like last year I bought my wife the Lost in Space collection, the series, right? And so we were sitting there watching through that, and Bill Mooney plays Will Robinson, right? And his character is one of those things that's really interesting in that too, is that like he's not always right, but he has the specific set of skills and the specific ability to survive. And cleverness, but he's also easily bamboozled because he's young and trusting and all that kind of stuff. And I think that kind of reflects back on what you're talking about with the idea that, in media, kids were portrayed as somebody who needed to learn for a very long time, even if they had a certain level of capabilities that allowed them to survive in whatever situation they were in. They still needed that protection of their parents and their guidance of their parents and stuff.
That's right. Put those kids in their place.
Hey, like my kids have grown out of their place now. They can go out into the world. They're old now.
Honey, fetch me the belt and a sandwich too.
So I love how Tim brought this up because I kind of glanced over it. But if you look at this is the robot that explodes on the Nazi scientist there, and I didn't notice it at the time, but it is a little ambiguous, but like it's pretty violent when you look at the way the explosion is framed, and it's a little ambiguous as to which parts are the robot and which parts may be the scientist. So that's pretty brutal.
I mean, there's you can see 2 feet and they're facing in 2 completely different directions. So that is obviously the dude's legs. And I was like, that is sweet. It looks so great.
I love how the smoke in the second pile is obscuring what is certainly a pile of blood on the floor.
Right. Yeah. So they were definitely like, not trying to do like something that would get them, censored or whatever. But this is some pretty violent paneling right here. So yeah.
I would assume he's not walking anytime soon.
Yeah.
At minimum, huh?
And the whole plot, of course, is to make an army, not just the buzz bombs, which I think are a really cool, weapon by themselves. This is where it got me a teeny bit silly, where it was like the actual plot was to make a bunch of robots that would say "touch me," essentially.
Oh yeah.
And then
are they Weinstein bots? What is this?
Yeah. And then they would they're Epstein bots. And then they would just show up at like the president's house and then like kill all the world leaders. So
I like how you mentioned "touch me." It's going to go great with the next ad.
I think I forgot about that. I forgot about that angle because the robots aren't even like lifelike. They're just like silver, like Metropolis style robots. And so I completely forgot about that subplot where it's like, oh, he was planning on having them encounter world leaders and blow them up on contact. I was like, what? You wouldn't be able to tell that the silver looking, like,
I know.
Eve Ditko as Metropolis robot wasn't a real person.
Eleanor, it would be rude not to shake the hand of this robot when he said hello. Downright rude.
Of course, we know robots are all our friends, obviously.
So
he's a Nazi robot. How can he not be friendly?
So von Wagel was going to turn the Cold War into a hot one. Imagine an army of robots disguised as human beings seeking contact with our nation's leaders. That's I wasn't exaggerating, ladies and gentlemen. That is in fact the plot.
Yeah. And
by golly, they would have killed our most valuable men.
Because they can't keep their hands off a robot.
Gosh, look at my uniform. I got his eyeball on my jacket.
We lost poor Sam to a toaster.
So one thing that's becoming a hallmark of the Mattriarchy is the voice acting that we do for the comics that we read, and I just love. So keep it coming. It's amazing.
Yeah, I gotta say, like, somebody in the chat earlier, Frugal, mentioned that your wimp voice was the best wimp voice they'd ever heard, and I have to agree to that.
Oh, I'm so proud of being a pansy.
That's not your normal voice.
I'm just glad I didn't have to do that voice for once.
Well, yeah. I always give Twitless a grief for not sounding like me. So
speaking of contact with men and women, again, this is why you got to read the original floppies with the ads, because you get a snapshot of America you're not going to get if you get the trade. But be lucky in love. Write thrilling love letters. Partial contents. How to break the ice. How to make everyday events sound interesting. How to make your sweetheart write more often. How to express your love. How to make or break a date. How to acknowledge a gift. How to say those little things.
So Evie from the chat says, are they anime robots? They look like their leader's waifus.
Yeah, you have Ray and oh gosh, what's the other one? Asuka.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I also wanted to mention that Frederick Wortham had an entire chapter on comic book ads.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I think I vaguely remember something about him about that. What was the since you've read that more recently? What was he wasn't in favor of them, as I recall.
No,
Okay.
Because it was like unattainable fitness goals, and like it was always like push-up bras were marketed in there and making women, like, he felt like teenagers shouldn't like see these unattainable things that you can't achieve because it's bad for your mind or whatever.
There's unattainable goals like 10
pounds of muscle in 1 month or whatever.
Or a scalp that doesn't itch.
He was probably just mad because he bought it and couldn't get any.
Well, actually, the one thing Phil and I've talked about on the show before is just the prevalence of how, like, not just in comic books, but how much marketing is being directed toward kids for the first time in human history. Because before, the advent of comics and those sorts of things, there just wasn't any kind of mass media was still, only 20, 30 years old when comics came out. And then all of a sudden there's entire mass media that's dedicated to children, right?
And if you want like a modern example, like look at TikTok.
Yeah.
There's no regulation on TikTok. And it's literally the same thing that you see in these comic book ads.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's the other side of it, is that the more things change, the more they stay the same. So you can definitely see a lot of things in American culture that are they're obviously different to an extent, but you can still see a common thread in modern culture, which is interesting. Obsession with a type of fitness, whether or not it's slightly framed slightly differently, it's still the same type of thing. It's just wearing a new set of a new skin, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing to point out about these books is the fact that they and this is something those of you who've read a lot of old comics will know. And we don't see this as much today in current comics, but they would often intersperse the story. Oftentimes they would have more than one story to begin with, right? But they were more like magazines than just the floppy book that we know today. And so they would sometimes have a comedic interlude with a comedy strip in there somewhere, or sometimes they would throw in some history. Page I've got pulled right here basically has some prose that just kind of starts talking about the first white man to climb Long Peak, so, which is definitely something that is you could totally do today.
Well, yeah, and wasn't there some sort of regulation that required a certain amount of reading material for them to be covered in certain distribution channels? I think for some comics in some, what's it called? You guys don't know what I'm trying to think of. It's a word for an area in which things can be sold. Market.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, the market.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, Rhys just spent 30 seconds thinking of the word market.
It has something to do with capitalism and our ecosystem and how it all works together and change all things of products and services.
Yeah.
I'm glad my brain's not the only one turning to mush.
I'm trying to remember. I think it was in Chicago where in order to be published on newsstands, a certain amount of prose literature had to be included in any periodical. So it couldn't just be picture books or couldn't just be comic books. They had to have a certain amount of column inches I think it was to be put in newsstands in Chicago. And I think that was put in place in the late 40s. And I think that's one of the reasons a lot of comics had that stuff in there even up until the 70s, was because to get around those laws.
What I love here is it ends with you can definitely tell these books were targeted at. Well, this book definitely was able to target both men and women, although that final header there, or heading for female hanging. No matter how tough a cowboy was, the code of the Wild West insisted that he be polite to women. But Ella Watson, otherwise known as Cattle Kate, tried the patience of the ranchers once too often. She was warned repeatedly to stop using her ranch as a fence for stolen cattle, but she and her pal in crime, Jim Averill, were found hanging by their necks from a tree in the summer of 1889 on the Sweetwater.
We need to bring that back. Oh. Did I say that out loud?
She should have towed the line.
Well, cattle stealing is pretty bad.
Are you saying we should have given her more rope, given her some slack?
Okay. Anyway, I'm not going to comment.
And here's another thing I love about these books is that they often had and this is another aspect of, and Boy's Life used to have these. I don't know if they do anymore, but the ads where you could basically collect those coupons and then mail in to get a whole bunch of stuff. And one of them was a guitar, a bike, a rifle. You could totally imagine in America being able to do this today, buy a bunch of comic books and other candy or whatever, and then mail in and get a gun. So,
I want to kill somebody, but I'm going to have to sell 250 issues of Grit first to get it.
No, but I got it pulled up. So share this so everyone can see that back in the day, you could totally get a I don't even think this is an air rifle. It says a 22 cal rifle. So like,
Mhm.
like Daddy, I want to buy some more Bazooka Joe gum so I can get a gun.
Well, yeah, there were high schools out here in West Nebraska that used to have shooting clubs that were just part of the high. I mean, you could do that for PE. Even back in the early '90s, they were still doing that. So
Didn't they take those out of the ads originally because was it the Reagan assassination attempt, or
have they
was
added
it one of the Kennedys?
I don't remember. There was something that I remember there. I do remember that there was some sort of push that had to do with advertising guns to kids. Like that stopped being okay.
Does it
Like
not
in
jump
this
out
comic?
to anybody else that it says "We trust you" right above the gun?
No, because as Dave says, America needs American guns. I would agree with that.
I mean, I would trust that the gun will shoot you.
I love how you were supposed to just get a whole bunch of what does it say? Simply give pictures with white cloverine brand salve, easily sold to friends, neighbors, relatives at 35 cents a box with picture. Alarm clocks, pens and pencil sets, Bibles. I'm okay. Bibles, billfolds, telescope. Okay, so Bibles, guns. This is America. So this is again. This is why
Guitars, meat grinders.
Yep.
Could you imagine being the kid going? Could you imagine being the kid going to the school and saying, "I got that pen set," and everyone else like, "I got a gun."
I sold enough salve to get a meat grinder.
And then the religion.
You can make some good sausage with that thing.
Well, yeah, for sure.
Or you can use it to help dispose of the limbs after you kill them with a gun.
Hey. We're not suggesting people get rid of bodies on the show.
And then you read the funeral service with the Bible that you got.
That's a lot of salve to sell. I'm just
okay.
He says we're hitting peak America on this show.
I'm gonna write a story where a guy basically commits murder, but he like gets all of the materials through some of these ads, and it's just like the whole murder kit.
Oh man, that's crazy. Well, I mean, there's a lot of ways to kill somebody. Let's not talk about that.
Okay.
So, our grip on this mortal shell is just paper thin, guys. Come on, let's be realistic.
Let's jump back to the reason why we're here, which is the Fighting American wins this auto race.
Right. Oh, and the auto race one, I thought that was the weirdest story in the history of well, not history, but in this book. Did anybody? Am I the only one that thought this was the weirdest one?
I think the one with the robot people who were supposed to make contact with you, like when we hit that point, that was pretty weird.
That's pretty weird.
So the premise is that there is a big international race, and oh hey, look, there's a screen to share. Come on, there you go. There's a big international, like a Grand Prix kind of a thing, and everybody, all the countries in Europe are sending like a car that's like the top of the line car that their country is paying for. And in America, we are sending some car that some guy put together in his garage out of junk.
Oh yeah, this scene is very, very like.
Isn't that essentially what they were doing in that day, though?
Yeah, everybody was making their own cars.
People came back from the war and they just started building their own hot rods, right?
Oh yeah.
The way this is framed though is very American because it's, and I predict that the U.S. entry will win the European road race despite the sneers of a certain foreign government.
Did the people that made Cannonball Run read this comic?
Well, building a hot rod's a real American thing. I mean, have any of you guys ever built a hot rod or souped up a car probably way more than you should have?
No,
No,
Well,
see, my brother and
my
I
experience
did.
is mostly on keeping old cars running. I didn't have the money to put into precision a car.
Well, see, and that's an American thing. My brother and I, we would do that all the time. For example, once we bought a Chevette, we cut off the top, put a roll bar on it, and made quite a fun with that one. Here's a really scary one. We took a Pinto and put a 5.0 Mustang engine in it. You could do donuts in reverse. I mean, it's just building stupid things. I took an S10 and put a 350 V8 engine in it. I revved it up so hard it actually torqued and cracked the windshield. You know, it's the American way. We build stupid stuff
that's
in
impressive.
the garage.
Well, my dad used to be a tune head back when I was very small. So I've worked on cars, but and I've kept my own running. But as far as that whole side of it, the closest I got is a bug that someday I will fix, but right now it's sitting in the garage.
Don't take it as too impressive. He had the skill in that. I was the more of hold this because I didn't know what the heck was going on. I learned a lot through him, but he was the motorhead. I was just there and learning.
No, that's really cool though, and it definitely fits the theme here. And but it's this very sense of like the guy who's the American who's pulling himself up by his bootstraps. He's doing it by himself. And he's facing off with the old world of Europe, who kind of have things kind of set up for them, and so the narrative kind of has that angle, which is we have this spunky, scrappy kind of guy. He's doing it all himself, but he's American, and his American spirit will triumph. And that's supposedly the kind of setup that we're supposed to follow here, but it goes awry. Frugal, since you're the one you're the motorhead here, do you want to summarize the trajectory of this particular story?
No.
Well, too bad.
How do I put this? You know what? I'll let somebody else.
I can step in.
Sorry. Yes, please.
Okay. So basically, the commies decide that there's no way that this American who built something in his garage is better than them and all of their engineers. So they decide to kill him. And the fighting American finds out that this is going to happen. And so he's got to step in and save this guy. And so they go through, and I love, by the way, these Dick Tracy side villains that are background characters that show up to try to kill this guy. So Fighting American and Speed Boy show up, and they clean house, and they're going to protect him. And so the guy's not sure. He gets beat up really bad. If I remember right, he's not sure he's actually going to be able to make it. And his daughter shows up and says, "Oh, for my father's health, I think we're going to have to bow out." And Fighting American says, "There's no way you're bowing out there. America needs you. We need this boost. And besides, he's the best mechanic with the best car and the best thing for history. So you got to do it.
Load up that vegetable on a boat. We're taking him overseas."
So we're going to go with you, and he can heal up on the road. And so his daughter's like, "Oh, okay, that sounds safe." So they take him on a boat, and the whole time they're on the boat, it's just saboteurs and spies the whole way across the ocean, which you'd think on a boat they'd run out of disposable villains to try to kill this guy. And eventually they do end up killing him. Spoiler alert. Sorry. But they do end up killing the guy, and then the Fighting Americans like, "No, that's okay. Somebody will drive the car anyway."
Right, because he didn't matter. It was just the win, the race.
So he ends up so he ends up driving the car himself, the Fighting American and Speed Boy, together win the race. And this is what I was talking about earlier. It turns out that the daughter isn't really a daughter. She's also a Soviet plant. Who's, a Soviet plant. And so the Fighting American wins the race and catches all the commies, driving the least car-looking race car I've ever seen in in anything drawn ever.
They do.
And that's
look like
including when my
tanks.
children used to draw cars. It's a spaceship.
Yeah, it was some backwards looking green thing, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll put up in just a second. Before we get to that, I did want to point out the panel on the right here. And the reason why is one of the things that Kirby was well known for was his ability to depict a whole orchestra of action in a single panel. And Jim Shooter, in a story he relates, one time, I forget which artist he was working with, but Shooter basically described multiple actions kind of happening in one panel. And the artist said, Jim, this is impossible. You can't do this. And Jim, because Jim was always, I feel like Jim showed people up a lot. That may be why people hated him.
Jim was never wrong. That's why.
Yeah. So Jim pulled out an old Jack Kirby panel and showed how Captain America did like 4 things in a single panel and said, basically, here's how you do it. And the artist was like, cool, and did it. And so you can see how Fighting American is like hitting a guy, bouncing off a wall, hitting a second guy. So he's like doing like 3 things in this single arc of action, I think. I think Speed Boy's just hitting the one dude. But you get this entire, like I said, this entire orchestra of action on a single panel. And I did want to point out that how Kirby was able to, one of the reasons why, as Tim had mentioned, why you can put so much action in this type of book is because Kirby is so good at orchestrating action that he can just cram a single page with basically an entire fight scene. Whereas other artists might take 4 pages to do. I hate to throw Gene, Liu, and Yang under the bus again, but if Yang were to do this, it would take like 3 pages, I think, to do every single action with the type of art that he does.
Well, and he's not an Action Comics guy,
right?
So
yeah,
that's an important thing. I couldn't do it either.
Well, neither could I. So that's fair. So here's the boat where everything happens. They get shot at like 100 times. And again, this book is just crammed with action, and there's an entire scene of
that's one panel turned into 4 panels.
Yeah. We get an entire montage of action.
And once again, it's a boat going across the ocean. I mean, you'd think they would run out of room for all of the commies, but
no. I was in the Navy. When you're in the Navy, like when you're on a boat, it's like 007. The enemies just keep spawning.
Please tell me there's no escort mission.
Well, in the comic, this entire story is an escort mission until the mechanic dies.
And then it was all sad.
So, I have to address Taylor's comment. Is this another one of those comics that will constantly kill off a ton of innocent people but never kills a single villain? Oh no, the villains die by the bucket. And the end of this comic, like a bunch of them blow up by crashing into the Eiffel Tower and exploding. No, it's not safe to be a villain in the Fighting American universe. But let's show off those cars that look like I don't know what they look like.
They're not cars. I mean, they don't. I mean, they are, but it was
like
it was crazy.
Cars, kind of.
That's just a turbine engine.
Yeah.
Okay, that's just an engine with wheels attached.
So this little green pup is it's got the American flag on it. Clearly, this is the one that the guy made out of his garage, right? And so like, it's got rear mounted engine, which I don't know that I've ever seen in a race car from the 50s, but it's the craziest looking thing. It looks like something from the Fourth World, it's straight from the streets of Apocalypse.
Well, that's Kirby. So
that's Kirby's, man. Yeah. It's the least race car looking race car I've ever seen.
Kirby apparently never. That makes sense because he lived in New York. Kirby apparently never had a car, so it's like Kirby, draw a car. I don't know what those look like.
In the books that I've read, he apparently had roid rage, and his wife had to drive.
Oh, okay. But yeah, I mean that was one of those things where you know, so that was the other one of the little turban looking thing. A lot of like early Indies cars were shaped like that. And so that shape kind of looked like a race car to me, but the one the Fighting Americas is in does not look like a race car to me. But apparently it's the fastest race car in history. So
But
Can you imagine the lift those cars would have gotten? They would have been they would have lifted off the road and flipped over and been all dead. They're not even, it's just there's no way the aerodynamics there would work.
Yeah, that's true.
So right after they win the race, and they win the race in like 3 panels. Like the race is clearly, this is not a race story, because the race is like barely happens, and then immediately after it's back to chasing commies, who then crash into the Eiffel Tower because I don't know, screw France or whatever, and they just blow. They just freaking, you know, this is kind of a dark image if you think about it. Okay. But
yeah. Well, and the crazy thing to me is too is like there happened to be a Fighting American themed jet plane just laying sitting there on the tarmac waiting to be stolen. So that was a fun thing.
And if you think about it, at this time, France is like our best buddies. We're trying to save the Eiffel Tower, but it explodes.
Well, I think the idea
this is like a sad ending.
Well, I don't know. If you're the hero, look at what the hero thinks of this towards the end there. Well, I guess that wraps it up. I don't feel sorry for them. They were killers.
See, the important thing is that it is sad that, you know, the Eiffel Tower is irreparably damaged. But but the good news is that three commies died. So it was worth it. Is it 4? Okay, 4 commies died, so it's worth it. Okay. Okay.
I mean, if you think about it, wouldn't you sacrifice like the Statue of Liberty for 5 commies?
I might need to go as high as 6 if I'm going to call that an even trade.
Yeah, I got to draw the line at 6 here. Can we keep the torch? Then maybe 5.
We have, you know, this is America. We got people that can fix it. You know, we've got copper. We can make it happen.
You can buy a whole bunch of pennies.
So we'll mine it from Michigan. I think we actually may have already mined all the copper out of Michigan. I'm not sure about that.
Taylor says, "I'll take that trade."
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but yeah, so that's, I think that wraps up all the Fighting American in the book. And I want to roll this in to talking about the bigger issue, which is, of course, this is a little bit exaggeration, maybe a little bit pastiche of patriotism in the thing. But where do you guys think this fits, or patriotism as a theme fits within this story and within the greater spectrum of comics? Because that's one of the things that gets thrown around a lot, is should comics be political? And I don't want to necessarily talk about the politics, the nature of that as a whole, but does this comic, is it anything other than propaganda? Is it not even propaganda because it's so silly, or is it just too much fun to even consider those sort of things? Where do you guys think this fits in?
Well, I think when you have a tense time, you need things to laugh at, to laugh with, to de-escalate situations too. And I think this was a great way to address what was going on, but yet, you know, put it in a way to still relax and get away from there. I mean, there's ways to tackle topics, but to lessen the severity of it and the impact, as well as to, you know, spread the word a little bit, I guess, too, as well, but not be as in your face as what we get today.
I think that's a fair take.
Yeah, the subtlety back then was a lot more. They're a lot more conscious of other people's thoughts. There was a lot more consideration, and yeah, it was definitely not much in your face. But you could still see it. You can still see it was on their mind. I think when you're reading through each one, you know, clearly, and like the first issue, you know, the ambiguousness of the villains and such.
Okay.
First, I want to mention that I just realized that the Statue of Liberty was gifted from France.
Yes.
And so we would be blowing it up to France things. But
Yeah. Also, it's more than that because it was designed by Eiffel. The guy who designed the Eiffel Tower also designed the Statue of Liberty.
So we're really just saying screw Eiffel at that point.
Well, we need a deep dive in this. There might be a deep hidden story behind this.
Well, they tried giving it to Alexandria first, and Egypt was like, "Nah, we don't want it." So we actually Eiffel needed somewhere to give it to, and so they gave it to us.
I think the difference between like today's political comics and like this one, for example, is Simon and Kirby actually cared about the story and providing like entertainment, while nowadays they care more about the message than they do actually like the art form. And essentially it's just to try to make it like a TV show or something instead.
Okay.
That's what I think.
Tim, I know you've got some ideas.
I do, but I think but they haven't really coalesced. It becomes a touchy subject when you bring up patriotism and the patriotic hero, because there's just some things I think are baked into it. Like, I think that if you don't like the country that a hero is posing as far as its representation, wearing its flag, then you're intrinsically not going to like that hero, because they have to espouse values that are either traditionally agreed upon for that country that you're supposed to be representing. So there is going to be that element of quote unquote politics there. And typically to make it work, that person is going to fight basically domestic threats that can either come from the homeland or from far away. So you'll always have people who are going to see some sort of political angle in those types of characters. To be frank, you look at Captain America comics. I mean, I hear some people say like, "Oh, he was the best when he was just like an adventurer, like Indiana Jones." And it's like, well, if that were the case, I would just read Indiana Jones. I wouldn't read Captain America. The reason you like Captain America is because you do see some sort of you see some representation of the traditional ideals of that individual, that character. I know it's not a popular opinion, but I do think that the portrayal of Captain America in the Marvel movies, for example, was probably the best portrayal of the character that, I would put it toe and toe against the comics for the most part. The comics, especially the ones in the last, say, decade, I think have been mostly miss. I don't think the writers really understood the character. And I think there are some key aspects that defined him on the silver screen. For example, there's that line in the first Avengers movie where they're making a comment about Thor. And he says something to the effect of, someone says, well, he's supposed to be like a Norse god. And right before he jumps out of the plane, he says, well, there's only one god, and he doesn't wear that cape or whatever. And it's a very quick line, but it's very indicative of the type of character he is. Same thing with, for example, like him getting onto people for the language that they use. Even though it's supposed to be showing that he's kind of a man out of time, it's also the idea that he represents the greatest generation. So he's going to have ideals that are kind of timeless and classic, and that make you kind of wish that type of person was still present in the modern era. And as far as like the story is concerned, he literally is a man out of time living in the modern era. So I think that books like this, I like personally. I mean, I personally do like any type of character that represents the homeland or their country. And it doesn't even just limit itself to America. Any type of character that I think wears the flag of their country is basically like, all right, show us what you got. Like, what is it that you represent? Whether you're Captain Britain or Alpha Flight, I want to see what is it that you have to offer. And I think the problem with that is that people see it as a stereotype, but it is. And stereotypes, they tend to exist for a reason, whether they're positive or negative. But in the sense of a character that's supposed to be representing the flag, I think you should be putting your best foot forward, and we like to see like how that turns out. So you're right. I think that the idea of politics and these types of heroes becomes tricky, because you're always going to kind of enter into that threshold with that in mind. So I think these characters are especially kind of difficult to write.
Yep.
Yeah, remember X-Men is like basically a comic of stereotypes, and that's like Marvel's most popular comic.
Well, G.I. Joe is basically a comic of stereotypes, and I love it. I mean, I freaking love G.I. Joe. That as kind of a tangent, Mark Pellegrini, my writer, he told me if you watch Predator thinking it's an adaptation of G.I. Joe, it completely changes the way you see that movie.
Yeah.
Because you have like Arnold Schwarzenegger, he's like Duke. You have Jesse the Body Ventura, he's essentially gung ho. You basically have a Native American character like Spirit. And I just thought, oh my gosh, he's right. It's basically like the best G.I. Joe movie ever created.
Well, I've got to watch that movie again now.
Yeah, that's changed.
I had never thought of it that way, but the instant you said it, I'm like, yes, you're right. That's 100% correct. Way to go, Mark. So, and I do think that there's something to be said about the idea of the patriotic hero representing what's the ideal, or what is best, or what the guiding principles that are behind the nation. I think that some people want to, and this is one thing I think that Captain America's really fallen down on since Civil War, frankly. I mean, essentially, I don't think we've had a good Captain America comic run that's consistently good since Civil War. But I think part of it is because so many of the writers don't want to tell stories that allow it to embody what's great about America. And I think even if you look at Captain America doing Indiana Jonesy swashbuckling stuff, it's still his attitude about what is the best about America that drives him to do action in the honorable way that we want to see Captain America be, right?
Well, absolutely. Like issue 250, which was by Roger Stern and Byrne, there was a panel and he says, we must all live in the real world. And sometimes that world can be pretty grim, but it is the dream, the hope that makes the reality worth living. And then he goes on a little bit more, but I think that's what it is what he embodies, the hopefulness, what we could aspire to be. And I think that's part of the problem with the last several runs we've had. They've all been about decimating and breaking down the character and tearing his dream apart, really tearing the dream apart and saying this dream is fictitious, it doesn't really exist, when in fact it absolutely does. That's why the United States was the fastest, quickest rise to power of any nation. It's because we had that dream, we had the motivations, the goals behind it, where people said, hey, if you want to do it, you could achieve it. You could take the risk. You have the possibility to get that reward. And that's one of the things of equality, the equality of opportunity, not necessarily outcome.
Well, and that's a really good point that you bring up. For example, so I hear a lot of people say that, well, Captain America can be hard to write because the values of America has changed in the modern era. And so even things that I would say even 3 years ago we would agree on as a very common 99.9% agreeable statement to make are suddenly cast into question simply because of subversives who they want to question and deconstruct everything, even our moral foundation. So take this for example. America was found on hard work and determination. Well, of course, the naysayers would say, well, not really, because even with your hard work, you don't accomplish anything. Or no, you didn't accomplish that on your own. People helped you. Or even worse, you have people who are just nihilists and they're like, I don't want to work. I just want to play video games all day and collect a stipend from the government or just live off of welfare, even though I'm able-bodied and can do it. And people, they applaud that. Like, they think that's great. They think it's funny. They think you're sticking it to the man. So sure, you have a subset of the population who might see that hard work is not a value, that it's something to actually try to get around, work smarter, not harder. Let's say I'm the writer for Captain America. If I believe that the core principle of hard work is good, there's a way that you write the character where you show that it's good in the storyline. Take that and you can even apply it to the modern day and just show, like, doesn't matter how much Captain America tries, he's always being put down by the media or whatever, but something happens in the storyline where his hard work pays off at the end. Don't you want to have your readers like aspire to do that? It's not about necessarily the real life consequence of that value being put into place. It's the fictional response to it. I mean, we are the people who create kind of the conclusion of our own stories, which is why you hear that kind of, I think it was Stan Lee who made that comment where it's like, well, who would win in fight, like Goku or Superman? And essentially Stan Lee's retort was, it's whoever the writer decides is going to win. Like, you get to decide that. So when you have values that you feel like need to be espoused and that are traditional, timeless, and classic, they're universally, I mean, we say that, I mean, we basically lay claim to the values of like self-determination, grit, self-reliance, et cetera, et cetera. But these are things that anyone all over the world can partake in. And I think that's what makes the character of Captain America resonate probably more than like a Captain Canuck or Captain Britain or whoever it might be, simply because the character has kind of embraced it, and other patriotic heroes have done the same over time. So well, I just don't really buy into the writer sentiment that, well, we can't because he has to reflect the modern times. Like, I think that's baloney.
Well, and I think when you get down to it, you know, you think about what was going on in Cuba last year and in Hong Kong 2 years ago, right? There are people that are rebelling against their government, that are looking for, they feel like they're being oppressed, that their voices are being silenced, and they're marching carrying the Stars and Stripes, not because they want to be America, but because they believe that the things that America stands for, the things that flag stands for, are things that they want to echo in their own things. And I think Captain America can and should be the same thing. He's representative of what makes America different, but what makes America different doesn't make it on that same difference unattainable by other folks.
Right, exactly.
They can say, hey, if I'm self-determined and independent, then I can, you know, give of myself and sacrifice in the same way that, you know, other people can as well. I think that can be a spreading thing. And I think that's one of the things about, because one of the big questions is that you have is like, okay, when's something political versus propagandic, right? That's one of the questions here. And technically, propaganda is any time that you tell one side of a story, right?
Well, speaking of that, we got some interesting engagement from chat. I'd love to bring into that, because Taylor says, I think propaganda all depends on what people think is normal. No one would call a comic about the FBI fighting the mafia propaganda. But Neostar Production says, whatever happened to metaphor or allegory of comics have always been political, then the issue lies more in the poor execution skill of writers, at least in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's part of it too. But one of the things that comes that I wanted to get to with the nature of if propaganda is just telling one side of a story, then I think when you're dealing with patriotic heroes, it's the concept of exclusionariness, right? So, with like so much of like what's going on with what's been going on with specifically Captain America, but even Superman in the last 10 years, it's the idea that, you know, the specialness of the character makes them an alien to the world. They can't be part of the world because they're too different from it. And that specialness is wrapped up in the kind of American concepts that they were designed to embody. But the idea that they were, you know, that they're supposed to embody is not an exclusionary but an inclusionary one, right? I wish, hang on a second, I gotta grab something. But earlier, Dave shared a thing on, Dave Ashranovich there in the chat shared a thing on Twitter. That was, and I will pull it up here, but it was an invitation to sorry, Mrs. H left us something on Twitter too. Oh
yeah, we do have to share that. So Mrs. H has been making memes for us.
In a second though, I want to keep to my point.
Oh, okay.
So, share screen. Come on.
So while you're doing that, I wanted to.
Here it comes. Right. So, but this idea of the Supermen of America, it was a Superman fan club, right? Strength, courage, justice, calling all red-blooded charter, calling all red-blooded young Americans. The charter membership is limited. Don't wait, right? And it's on it. It says that instructions from Superman on how to develop strength, courage, and agility, and how to protect yourself in times of danger, right? So here it is, DC Comics calling. That's a horribly small picture there. Can I get it bigger than that? No. Okay, it's fine. I read the important bit. We'll just move on. But the idea is that DC Comics here is inviting people to participate in that exceptionalness, the concepts, the ideas that make Superman so American are things that you can do, that you should do. Be strong, be courageous, be agile, have self-defense, be part of this big thing that is America. And that's not something that's like, it's not, Canadian kids can do those same things too. So,
Well,
Tyler, not appreciated. So, but that was, but yeah, so that's the thing. That's something that I think that Captain America, and Superman are not supposed to be, that, I've said my piece, I think. Okay, I'm going to shut up.
One thing I would say, I think there were two elements I think that connect to this. The first one, okay, before we get to that, memes. So for those of you new to the lore, Mrs. H drew a spider pickle, which was an inside joke that we made making fun of
weeks ago.
We made fun of the Spider-Verse and the fact that everything and everyone is Spider-Man. And so I naturally made the extension to Spider Pickle. I turned myself into a pickle, Mary Jane. So Mrs. H turned this into I would say kind of a mascot for our show, and has been
it's a recurring joke.
It's been cranking out these memes. So this is the Spider Pickle for today. So
here we go.
But I wanted to say that what I think is interesting about the whole propaganda and concept, and the concept of writing patriotic heroes that Tim and the rest of us have been discussing. I think it has to do with the motives of the person who's writing, and what you think the arts are supposed to be. Several people have brought up in the panel today about writing for entertainment's sake. That is a political worldview. Political as in the fact that it is a stance that you have when you approach the arts. And it is a stance that you are more than welcome to have, and it is a stance that some people agree with, and it's a stance that some people vehemently disagree with. You can guess who. There are people who vehemently believe that the arts are not just the arts, they are a messaging platform, and therefore it has power. And if it has power, it can be used for good or it can be used for evil. It can be used to fight for the oppressed and the downtrodden, or it can be used to oppress. So if you see the world through that worldview, your approach to art is going to be very different. So whenever you pick up a patriotic superhero, if you think to yourself, I have to use this platform and this opportunity to do something that is socially just and uses power for good, I think it's predictable to see the type of story you're going to get. The second point I was going to say, and I think it is partly related to the first, but it's the fact that if you choose the first mindset, which is to be entertainment oriented, then it's simply a case of, do you have the imagination or do you have a lack of imagination? Now, as much as Kurt Busiek can be someone I can no longer follow on social media, and he's gotten quite intolerable, there was a time when Kurt Busiek could set aside whatever his kind of what his personal politics were, and he would simply kind of say, who is this character? What would they actually do in this situation? How can I write them in an interesting way? Because anyone can acquire the craft to approach a patriotic superhero and say, this character embodies the traditional spirit of, and then you just fill in the blank of the country: Russia, Chile, America, Cuba, Canada, wherever. And then you simply use your, imagination to write because that's the point of an imagination. You don't have to be the identity or from a particular country in order to imagine how a character from another place would be. And one of the marks of a good writer is the ability to leverage your imagination to imagine something that is not just yourself. People who could only write themselves are biographers. They write memoir. And I think you can easily see the fact that a lot of, I think, of current big two writers, they're not necessarily good fiction writers. They're memoir writers. They can write themselves. Alison Bechdell's really good at writing herself and staring at her own navel and saying, "Where did I come from?" I don't know if I would give her, props for being super imaginative. And so the mark of a good superhero writer, I think, is having a fantastic imagination and being able to imagine what would someone from another, country or place of existence or plane of existence, in the case of an alien, what would they be like? And I'm going to imagine what that's like, and I'm going to write that character in a way that is consistent and fitting. So to me, it's a case of either the stance that you take via the writing and entertainment, and it's the ability to leverage your imagination.
Yeah, I agree. I want to point out that Neostar's production here, his comment about Captain America, the same problem as Superman, and with the pessimistic, narcissistic people, that touches on a lot of things that Rhys and everyone's already touched on, is the aspiring to a dream, aspiring to the great things. When you already believe that, you're just right, you're not going to aspire to anything. You're not going to have to, there's a whole bunch of the ideologue just falls into like this, they don't, why do I have to? I'm already right. And the message is, the ability to relate to that is missed, and people don't want to take the time to even understand that or relate to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's definitely the idea that people who believe that they're already right maybe don't have the need to aspire. But I think that's also touches on something I was kind of walking around earlier. The idea that part of the American ideal is to encourage other people to participate, right? And the idea that even if the world is cruddy, that you still can, there's still hope. There's still a moving forward. There's still the idea that tomorrow can be better, even if today's been terrible, right? That's the sun will come out tomorrow, bet your bottom dollar, all that Annie stuff, right?
Tomorrow.
But there's a reason that Annie's was published for 60 years, right? It's the reason it's had like 3 musicals and a Broadway play based on it. That kind of rags to riches paradigm is part of the American imagination. And that actually comes back to something that, not to just, dote on the guy on our panel, but looking at the way that some of the characters in Common America have played with what Tim and Mark have done, is having, people like Misha and oh my goodness, I'm going to forget her name.
Kimiko,
thank you. I was like, it's Common Ramen, but her real name, Kimiko, how they are, they're not part of Carly's past, but they're part of her future, right? That distinctly, profoundly, optimistically American idea that she wears around, that they've, become part of. And that's contagious. That's one of the great things when you introduce the Kimiko character, is how she just, from across the world had seen Carly doing her thing and is like, yeah, that's what I want to do, and how that sort of hope is contagious. And that's something that I think that
it's something that
really well. It's fun.
It's something I gleaned from traveling. I spent a lot of time in Europe, and then obviously we have our roots in Asia. And I mean, it's basically the hope of every Filipino to come to America. Like, that's the one thing they all want to do. They just want to get a visa and make it here. And then being like the son of immigrants too. I mean, the one thing they would tell me, because I mean, you could see it popping up when I was a kid, particularly like in middle school. I was still too young to really grasp like politics. But I just remember like I had teachers and a few classmates who just like, I don't know, they just hated America. Like they just wanted to talk about how bad everything was. And I just remember like that would infuriate my parents more than anything when I would like talk to them, and they'd be like, the heck are these stupid people talking about? Like, we came from basically like a second to third world teetering country. Things went the crapper as soon as the Americans left, because we made them leave. Like, we wanted them to leave. And within like less than a decade, everything went to pot. And we struggle to come over here. And why is it that these stupid entitled people feel like this is the worst thing ever? Do they not have, are they not educated, or do not have the world experience to know how life is like outside of here? And in
Yes.
Europe as well. I mean,
Right.
I lived between France and Austria. They would always make fun of Americans. And so that part of the stereotype is completely true, with the exception of a lot of the countryside people. They had a fairly optimistic vision of what America was like. But I noticed that as much as these people made fun of us, they all wanted to come here to at least visit, because they were like, "Oh, I want to fire a gun. I have never fired a gun before." It's like, I thought you make fun of guns. Like, yeah, but you want to fire one. Oh, you Americans so unhealthy with your Big Macs. And it's like, but you want one, like you want to try it, right? And so I noticed that there's that one funny line in, like, I think it's The Interview, where it's like, they hate us because they ain't us. Like, that's what I always think of when I think of some of these countries. But you even look at, for example, in My Hero Academia, the main aspirational hero is All Might. And even though he's Japanese, he basically studied in America. And he has a protege named Stars and Stripe. And I think the most flattering thing I've heard in the last year, where people were like, "Oh my gosh, Horikoshi modeled Stars and Stripe after Common America." I was like, no, I'm pretty sure he didn't. I don't think he really cares. But the idea of a blonde bombshell American protagonist is not unusual. Like, we're not the first to tackle that motif or that aesthetic. But even the Japanese, they all have that kind of idea of, well, this is America. It's bombastic. It's big. It's, kind of grandiose. So they have an idea of what it is. And that's one of the things that we try to put in our book, is we do have that perspective. We do get accused sometimes as being political, but it's like, no, we actually don't write it with politics in mind. If we say hard work is good, self-reliance is good, when there's a mob coming after you, the best thing to do is dig your heels in, and in her case, literally, and stand your ground. That's not political. Like, that's just what we consider to be good values that you can pass down. It's just we portray it from from an American lens, but people from across the world can read it and think, yeah, like, that's what you need to do. Like, that's what makes America America. But they're values that we try to write in based on not a political lens, but from the lens of what we consider to be what America has kind of embraced as its core values and principles.
See, and that's part of the situation too, is like, when so many people they use the word political, they're talking about divisiveness, right? They're talking about party, they're talking about separation. And if you really drill down to the political heart of what makes America America, it's that e pluribus unum idea, right? It's that we're stronger, that the out of many are one. We're
Right.
intentionally and volitionally creating one people by working together on something. And that means everybody's got to chip in, and everybody's got to work hard, and and understand that, like, when I build me up, I'm building you up. That idea that there's an organic relationship between those things, and that, like I said, let's be Superman.
Well,
that's
I think you bring up great points, and I say this in generalization, that men have wickedness and evil in them, and I think that's where a lot of that hate comes from. Like you said, people say they hate America and this, that, or especially people in America, is because it stems from jealousy that they haven't earned that, and they haven't gotten it, and they see other people, and instead of being grateful and happy for those people, and and celebrating those people and being happy for them, because realizing other people could help pull other people up, instead they look at it, denounce it, and find ways to tear it up. And often those people, like you were mentioning earlier, Tim, too, from my personal experience, from my views of that, a lot of those people haven't been around much, especially around the world, seen other countries and how they view us. They assume that they all hate us, but there is a large group that they want the opportunity that we have. I mean, there's reasons why people are dying to get here today, because they want the opportunity. Yet we have these people here in the very walls in the States that fail to see that opportunity. And that's a real challenge to show them and deliver that message that the opportunity is there for you. You don't have to accept anything. And I say that because it comes close to heart, because I grew up really poor. I mean, dirt poor. And I was very fortunate. My mother was a role model. I've seen her, pick up from a bad situation and do what she could, and seen that you could, with hard work, it wasn't easy. With hard work, you can build off of that and make something of yourself. And that's a message I try to always deliver to my children today. I say, look at how blessed we are. We have a home, we have this and that. When I grew up, there was 5 of us in a 1-bedroom apartment with 2 single beds. That's really wonderful when you're a teenager and all. And it's just, they don't realize the opportunity. Instead, it's easier to hate and find blame rather than look at yourself and do what's hard.
Or what happens too is that a lot of the people here, and I think the worldview is important, because I remember, especially in my early years in college, socialism was like a big thing. Like everyone wanted to be a socialist, and I don't think they wanted to be full-fledged commies, but they were like, oh, socialism is good. And I remember when I was living in Austria off and on for 2 years, what my final analysis came to was it reminded me of a Potemkin village. There was something about it that was off, because when I lived there, it was very picturesque. I mean, you were looking at very groomed, well-mannered people. It was like The Sound of Music, very beautiful countryside. Everything was orderly, and yet something about it didn't sit right with me. And what it was in their socialized world, there was no opportunity for failure. And it also meant that there was a stagnation of ideas. As I wandered across 2 universities, I could not find people who would disagree with each other. They all had the same opinion. They all thought, yeah, socialism is good. Religion is a crutch. And I would just be like, okay, well, what about this? And you could tell that they had never been confronted with ideas contrary to their own, because they were all kind of trained to think in lockstep. Because I think it was because of the post-World War II era, they were so fast to accept any measure of peace whatsoever that they chose uniformity. And I just remember, like, for example, when I was living in France, I was living with a host family. They were very, very kind, very, very sweet. And at the time I was like 18 or 19, somewhere in there. And I think it was my 3rd day. I woke up, and the kid in our host family, there were 2 brothers. One was a year above me, and one was 2 years below me. So this kid must have been 16, 17. I woke up, and as I'm going downstairs, his door opens, and it's just him and this girl, and they're just wearing bathrobes. And I knew there wasn't a sister in there. I knew there was I just knew there were 2 boys and a father and a mother there. And I was like, okay, this is kind of weird. But they just came downstairs and just had breakfast. And it's like, oh, how was school today? Or how was school yesterday? And it's like, oh, fine. How'd you sleep? Oh, good. And their view on sexuality was so unprudish that I realized, I remember at one time they were like, oh, you Americans, like in your comedies, you're always talking about like getting the woman, like you make it look so hard. Yeah, it's so easy. And I was like, yeah, but you've made it where there's no thrill. There's no opportunity for failure, because you've destigmatized sex to the point where it's no wonder you're all nihilists. Like, you are granted your pleasures at a very young age. You don't have to seek it out. There is never the opportunity to be turned down, because you could just pay for a prostitute if you want to, or just shack up with your classmate. And at least here, like in America, it's just in recent years that we've hit the Tinder age, where you can just like swipe and hook up and whatever. But even then, I would still argue that there is that degree of stigmatization as far as like religious communities are concerned. I know a lot of people who are very much opposed to one-night stands and the hookup culture. But I just remember living in Europe, I was like, the idea that you guys have done something that transgresses the American idea of kind of a utopic society is ironically kind of not what we're aiming for. What you said is correct. You're aiming for the opportunity and given the choice to pursue things. You're not handed it, because once you're handed it, it almost makes it kind of removes the joie de vivre, what makes life worth living and what makes it joyful, because you're not guaranteed anything. You have to work for it.
So true.
I've heard that about one of the big criticisms of the socialism style of society is that it kind of flattens things.
Yes, it does.
And it stifles innovation because of that. So everyone more or less is, in this kind of more cookie cutter-ish existence, but you don't get the extremes of failure, but then as a consequence, you don't get the heights of success.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely on point.
Which
like American Spirit.
Yeah, I was just saying, which sounds kind of hellish to me.
Well, and I mean, the thing I can't get over with that whole, I mean, this is a political stance, it's a worldview stance. I can understand like not wanting to rise and fall on your merits, right? Like take your lumps, and because part of the thing is like, I might want to live a simple life that doesn't involve, whatever. I mean, I've known people that just, they want to be, they're content being poor. They have values in other things, right? They they don't want the headaches. They just want something simple, and that's the life they want to live. And I can't see why someone would say like, oh, that's not, you don't have the option of that. You need to suffer with I don't know. That's not a well composed thought yet. So.
Well, I agree. There's a lot of people that way, and that's freedom of choice.
Yeah.
And be honest, we've probably all been there too. I mean, I've had points in my career where I was handling a massive amount of stuff. And matter of fact, just 5 years ago, I said, I think I want to take a step back in my career and focus on another section of it, and maybe handle a little less because I had 2 kids, I had a full-time job, I was running a side job, I was working another job on top of that. It's like, enough's enough. I think I want to boil it back a little bit, make it a little more simplified, and spend more time with my kids. Who knows, maybe another 3 years from now I want to ramp it up again. Who knows. We go through periods of that, and as was mentioned before with the socialism aspect, it's absolutely right. When there's nothing to gain, why would you risk? And the world is risk and reward. You could lose. And that's another misconception a lot of people don't get. They see these people that were successful and they just assume, oh, they're lucky. How many failures did they have to get there? They don't look at that part. How much hardship do they get to get there? Because a lot of times those people have went through a lot more to be that successful. They didn't just always inherit it. Yeah, some did, but a lot didn't. So there really is, without any risk, as you were saying, there will be no reward. There's been studies done on that. Heck, there was even a classroom that was taught one time that was done. All the students, the instructor had the students vote that they want it handled like a socialistic society or a capitalistic, and they went with the socialistic because they thought it'd make it easier. And all the students that were getting A's all of a sudden stopped studying, stopped trying as hard, and their grades all dropped. And the ones that they're all for it because they weren't doing as well, their grades started going up. But then eventually, by the end of the course, almost everyone was failing, because nobody wanted to put in the effort anymore. And all the other ones was just assuming the other ones aren't going to want to fail. So they'll put up the effort and pull them up too, which is a problem you have when you have nobody with any optimism and any dream and desire.
I got to get going, guys. But yeah, before I leave, I wanted to touch on that. That's something that, communism breeds is complacency. It goes back to kind of the same thing as the safe place, which, is submersive. At first, everyone wants that. Everyone wants, everything to be good and safe and well off. But the ultimate underlying thing is that growth is a struggle. To grow, to get to a high place, to reach, to aspire is just a struggle. So yeah. But thanks. This has been really awesome, guys. I love listening to all your points. They've been great. And Neil Star Production, Common Writer, you're absolutely right, man. But have a good night, everybody. And thanks, Matt, for having me on. And
yeah, man.
Take it easy, guys.
Cool. Well, Barry is leaving it up. I think I've said everything I have to say. I think we're pretty well close to wrapping up the show. Does anybody have any final thoughts on stuff?
America. I mean, I will say I did get a very Team America vibe after re-experiencing Fighting American with you guys, and also having Captain Cummings share his thoughts about the kind of slight satirical angle to it.
Mhm.
What I think is interesting about Team America is that it is a kind of a loving satire. It's a satire that, because there's satire that's meant to really say, oh, the thing I'm satirizing is stupid, and
Right.
and Team America is like, yeah, things in America are dumb, and the hyperbolic side of it deserves to be poked at, but it's also like, at the end of the day, the thing that still saves the day. And the people who are really trying to tear it down, the Film Actors Guild or whatever, they're the ones who are shown, them and Kim Jong Il, or they're the real villains, the commies, essentially. And so in this piece, I detect a sort of similar spirit. It's definitely hyperbolic. It's definitely meant to be a little bit satirical about, people who are seeing communists in their soup. But at the same time, it does not go so far as to say that Fighting American really is that wrong. At least in terms of fighting for America against its enemies. I think it goes it's a bit hyperbolic in the sense that there's enemies literally coming out of every they're spawning, as Captain Cummings said, they're spawning on the boat.
From the dark corners of the ship.
Yeah. But at the same time, I think it's kind of there's a difference between a loving satire and that sort of biting, cynical satire. And so I do appreciate being able to read Fighting American with that kind of slight satirical awareness. I think it actually makes me appreciate the work a little bit more, honestly, because I think it is that sort of loving type of irony, slight irony. This has been a really interesting discussion on patriotic books. I think we could do a follow-up to this and maybe look at another type of patriotic book, maybe not Fighting American per se, but there's a lot of them. I was thumbing through The Shield, which is by the original, which predates Captain America by several months, and was done by the comic company that eventually became Archie. And then has been rebooted and retooled several times. So he might be an interesting one to take a look at. Obviously, there's Captain America, but
everybody talks.
Yeah, everybody talks about it.
About Captain America. It's
So,
almost unavoidable.
Right.
There's that DC Comics, the Freedom Fighters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love the Freedom Fighters.
And we could also take a look at potentially some of the war comics that were written. Sergeant Fury and so on. The traditional, so patriotic they're actually just military men.
I definitely want to take a look at war comics, specifically because I think that's something that was such a huge part of comic books from the mid 50s through the early 80s that is almost forgotten by modern comic readers. And like there's a reason that the Sergeant Rock and Weird War and those things that they were just in print consistently for that long, and that I think is well worth some study, some discussion on that sort of stuff.
Yeah, isn't it kind of weird that like Joe Kubert, a lot of his work is forgotten because people don't really think about the war comics nowadays.
Yep.
But his sons are like the biggest thing ever.
Yeah, I do think I feel like some of that is intentional. That some of that may be intentional. There seems to be, I don't know, that maybe that's conspiracy theory talk, but
Black Hawk, that's the other one I wanted to say. We should take a look at Black Hawk.
Yes. Yeah. Black Hawk's amazing stuff. Amazing stuff. Well, guys, thanks so much for coming on the show. I really have appreciated it. I think it's been a fun conversation for sure. Do you guys have anything you want to talk about before we go about stuff that you've got coming up? I know that is it in a couple of weeks, Tim, Volume 5 of Common America launches?
It's actually next Wednesday.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Well, that's really cool.
Congrats.
Yeah. That's going to launch 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. Next Wednesday.
Very cool. Very cool. Can you give us any hints about the stuff that we're gonna be seeing in it? Any kind of, not spoilers, but teasers?
Yes and no. So the problem with it is that we're essentially resetting. So the villain from last time, she's locked up, and so we're actually gonna save her for a later arc. So we have to kind of start from scratch. Where we pick up is essentially the Common Core. Their popularity is on the rise, so they're getting some gigs, they're doing some shows, they're essentially like pop idol people. And there's some new threats that pop up, threats that were hinted at in the previous saga, but we never had a chance to really flesh out. But now they're rearing their head, and so they're gonna have to fight them. And there's some twists and turns along the way before the volume ends. I actually had to turn in the last draft to the printers this morning, and so I gave it one more go through. So it'll be kind of neat. I think the only thing that'll be kind of disappointing is a lot of people like the emotional stuff that we put in the later volumes, but because we're having to go back to square one, there's going to be a lot more plot driven and less on the drama, but it should be fun.
See, I think that makes a lot of sense, because where you left stuff with volume 4 has a lot of those like threads getting resolved.
Yes, and we're leaving some of them for the crossover in the summer.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So we're essentially, I was telling someone, I said, this is essentially like our Ghostbusters 2. And someone's like, that's not a good thing. I was like, what? You don't like Ghostbusters 2? And they said, no, the movie was horrible. I was like, oh.
No, it wasn't horrible. I thought Ghostbusters 2 was good.
Well, it's kind of like, I think I see where they're coming from, is they're like, oh, Ghostbusters 2, it starts off with them like being like doing parties because they're losers and they got sued by the state, basically. And I don't think I ever really picked up on that, but it's the idea that some people, they want something that picks up almost immediately after the events of what came before. Whereas this volume takes place about 6 months after the previous volume. Okay. So some time has passed and some growth has occurred.
What I want to know is, when are they going to fight a character like Grizzlios Grizzly?
The other thing too is that I think some people might be disappointed in our preview images for the book, because there's so many spoilers that we don't want to show off who they're fighting. So I'm trimming a lot of the panels right now so that we control what's visible in the preview pages. So I don't even want to reveal what they're fighting this go around either.
That's fun.
If you don't know who Grizzlios is, he's a Greek power lifter, strongman, and he screams really loud all the time.
Did you see this thing? Someone posted it 3 days ago. Apparently it's like the ultimate slap fight competition. They just get like bodybuilders to like professionally slap each other, and they got like
their face.
Yeah, they got an MMA fighter versus a lumberjack, and this lumberjack just smacked the crap out of this dude. It was great.
I was unaware that was a thing. No, I had no idea.
Here's a video of the Greek god powerlifter in the private.
We'll have to watch that at some point.
Good stuff.
So, Captain, have you got any interesting history videos or anything coming up recently?
No, I just got more. I think I got some reviews and things coming up for fun. But the thing I want to mention is I always find it nice that people always ask me to come on videos. I don't do them as much as I'd like to due to time and situations, but it seems like I'm always getting to be surrounded by a bunch of wonderful people to learn from, to laugh with. So, and I got that here again today. I just thank you again for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
I figured it was right up your alley.
It was.
So, also I love a lot of your retro video game reviews are just a pleasure to listen to. You've got so many people look for things to nitpick that are really I don't know. You've got such good energy about stuff. It's fun to watch.
I try to remain positive, but I do be honest and negative when it occurs. I had one person said, "Are you always positive in all your reviews?" I said, "Have you seen the one I did this one product? I put a piece of poop giving me the middle finger. This thing is a piece of crap." I have a hard time sometimes with comic book reviews because so many of them lately have been just so mundane and down the middle. How can you review something unless it's really good or there's something to complain about? It's like it was just meh. How am I going to review that? I will say though, maybe check out Daredevil, The Woman Without Fear. That really impressed me, that first issue.
So there you go.
Interesting.
So Twitless, what have you been up to? I know that there's been some whispers that I've heard that another Omega Girl is nearly out there.
Yeah. I'm just waiting for Indie Planet to post it. And they're kind of taking their time. But it should be coming soon. So yep. And
for those of you guys who don't know, Twitless writes a comic called The Adventures of Omega Girl, and there are links in the description to check that out. You can also check out Captain Frugal and Cap'n Cummings, the 10-cent story channels, or the YouTube channels are in the description, and a link to the Iconic Comics store where you can buy Common America, Black Ops, Doug Ernst, Soul Finder, and a bunch of the stuff that is also down in the description. So I got it all in there today.
Awesome.
I was all prepared. So Mrs. H desperately wants you to cross Omega Girl over with
oh my gosh. That's yeah.
I wash my hands of that description. I don't know that it is destiny. She says it is. Guys, thanks for tuning in. Next week we are having a discussion of Kingdom Come, and we're going to be having the gloves off talk between Twitless and I over whether Kingdom Come is even worth remembering.
We're gonna blow the conversation to Kingdom Come. Hey,
we've been having we've been having an ongoing debate over that for a couple of years, and we're going to have playing referees will be Mike Hutchison and RJ Carter from Critical Blast, and those guys we're going to have a good long discussion about Kingdom Come. So that'll be next week. Superman's a farmer. Yeah, that was the only good thing about that comic. It's happening again for the last time.
That is correct.
That is true. Wait till you see the thumbnail.
Great band that's got to keep doing a farewell tour. Kiss on their 90th.
Yeah, right.
Something like that. Okay, guys. Thanks for coming to the show, for tuning in, and we'll see you guys around. Until next time, keep loving comics. Bye.
Adios.